countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey! And it's now time for the last comic shop!
Yes, we are opening up the firehouse this week to newbies to help them find their way underneath the comic book tent.
Yeah, and we're keeping the shop open for the oldies and the randos and whoever else might wander in because they are fans of a licensed property and heard they're making a comic book. And
I'm the host with the most, Andy Larson. I'm a fan of licensed comic books. We also got J.A. Scott. He's a fan of licensed comic book. Chad Smith, you're a fan of licensed comic book. And we got even Mikey Wood. And he loves Starios. I think he's the only person that has all those issues like that.
Starios? Yeah.
Yeah, Starios. Starios.
Starios. That sounds like a breakfast cereal.
It does, doesn't it? So in any case, we have a Halloween treat for all of our fans out there at the Last Comic Shop podcast that do love licensed comic books. Because I was nice enough to go and get us a guest for this week. Yay! Right? It's the wonderful Erik Burnham, who has written an amazing amount of comic books, especially in the genre of licensed comic books. I don't know if that's a genre per se, but it's a very popular out there. So he's written things like G.I. Joe and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Godzilla. And he's also written Ghostbusters, which is the reason why I thought it would be awesome to bring him to the Last Comic Shop during the Halloween season.
Which is also why we're in a firehouse this week. The Last Comic Shop is conveniently located.
That's in Tribeca, right? I think that's where
the interiors were in
the interiors were in a studio. Yes, it is Tribeca, Andrew. Firehouse Hook and Ladder Company 8.
Yes.
Look at all this technical know-how. Here I was just wondering what all this ectoplasmic goo was laying everywhere.
Sorry about that.
Here, without further ado, we're going to rev up the Archive Drama 3000 and get Erik Burnham on the horn.
Who are you going to call Erik Burnham?
The firehouse dates from 1903 and it is still an active firehouse. It was one of the first ones to respond to the September 11th. The interior of the Ghostbusters base was shot in a Los Angeles studio and in Fire Station number 23, a decommissioned Los Angeles firehouse.
Yes.
It also appeared in the movie Hitch.
For the four of you that saw Hitch.
All right, we are here at the Last Comic Shop with Erik Burnham! Yay!
I'm from Minnesota. I'm not comfortable with this kind of enthusiasm. You know what I mean?
It's not stoic Midwesternism. It's all excitement, man. It's so great for you to be here at the Last Comic Shop. Thank you so much for stopping by.
I'm happy to be here. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
As we've talked about on the Last Comic Shop many, many times, licensed comic books are always a great way to get folks into the comic book tent because, again, they know about these characters from movies, television shows, what have you, and then they find that there's a comic book with these characters, and they're like, man, I'll pick it up and I'll read it. And from there, they end up not only liking that particular comic book, but it just, expands their mind to the wonderful universe of comic books available to them. And I know that all of us in the Last Comic Shop, we were all huge fans of licensed comic books when we were growing up, whether it was Star Wars or Masters of the Universe or Thundercats or G.I. Joe. Erik, I got to ask, were you a fan of licensed comic books growing up? Were you a fan of comic books in general, I guess?
I was. I mean, comic books were around me from an early age. My dad had a collection before I was born that was still around. My grandpa always had comics for the grandkids when they came over. So, I mean, I was exposed to it and, it was love at first sight. I've always lived in kind of remote locations, at least locations without a comic shop. So when they were available in newsstands and gas stations and such like that, I would find whatever was available, and that's what I would read. And licensed comics were one of the most readily available.
Do you have any that stick out to you as early favorites?
Oh, I always like the movie adaptations. Here's the Ninja Turtles from 1990, the adaptation, or Batman, or in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Just here's 64 pages in the entire movie that you can go back to and flip through and enjoy. So yeah, I love that.
Nice.
Oh, those were great. Cool. I remember picking Jerry Ordway's brain about the Batman adaptation because the ending was different
it's a lost art form nowadays. Like, they don't really do a lot of licensed movie tie-ins, and that's sad because I feel like there's an opportunity for folks. But you're doing a great job of kind of filling that gap a little bit here. Any other particular characters that you were a fan of back in the day?
I mean, it was always Spider-Man.
Nice!
Always my favorite, yes.
Oh, man. Do you remember your first Spider-Man issue?
I know that I had some from my dad's comic collection. I don't remember specifically those. The one I most specifically remember reading over and over when I was 5 or 6 years old was a Marvel Tales reprint of Stan and Steve Ditko issue, Spidey Strikes Back. I think it was Amazing 19.
Oh,
so
yes.
that's the one I remember. It was the Enforcers, the Sandman, Human Torch. I had no idea what any of this stuff was, other than, hey, that's Spider-Man. I don't know what the rest of this stuff is, but it's cool.
Man, we are kindred spirits here, Sarah. Yeah. Because my first one that I can remember it's hanging on my wall is a Marvel Tales reprint of Amazing Spider-Man #6. Nice. With Spider-Man versus the Lizard. So we were in that same wheelhouse, sir. That is awesome.
Nice.
So you went from from being a comic books fan to going into and doing comic books as a career. Now, I did say that you did some other things before eventually you got into comic books. You were a radio DJ, I think. You were in a video store, which I think helps you out with some of the licensed materials that you got now. But how did you break into comics? Now, I kind of still know the story, but I'll let you tell the story for all of our fans.
I'll try and break it down as concisely as I can. And it started off with when I was laid off from radio. I started just being on the internet a lot more, on message boards, a lot of chatting with people on the old dearly departed AOL Instant Messenger. We were all grouped together talking about comics. And the thing that came up a lot was several people in the group would go, these books suck. We could do better. We could do better than Marvel or DC. Finally, some guy said, why don't you guys put your money where your mouth is? And we put together an anthology. The Shooting Star Comics anthology is the first thing I ever did. And then that turned into a independent company for a couple of years. And we published Tom Waltz's first comics work, which was Children of the Grave. IDW wanted to publish the collection. So Tom got the collection published at IDW, got to know those folks, became an editor, and reached out to me because he was a fan of the Nick Landine, the comedy stories that I wrote for Shooting Star. Okay. He asked if I wanted to pitch for a horror book, Gene Simmons' House of Horrors.
Right.
So I pitched a couple ideas. I sold one. I got that. The next thing he said is, I have this thing that nobody else wants. It's a toy that's coming out. It's a tie-in comic. I did that. Afterwards, he says, do you like the A-Team? Yeah, I love the A-Team. Cool. Do you want to write some A-Team comics? So I split those. They had Chuck Dixon on Hannibal and Face, and I got to write BA and Murdoch.
The fun ones.
The fun ones. And then from there, it went to... I knew they had the Ghostbusters license. I was bugging Tom about pitching them. They let me pitch something just as a, to get it pre-approved in case they decided to do more. They were doing the holiday one-shots at that time, and it was 2009. January 2010, he called and said, hey, do you want to do this? We're doing this thing called Infestation. It's like a knot crossover where we have a common thread running through a bunch of books, but they don't actually cross over with each other. Would you like to write the Ghostbusters one? Yes, I would. I would absolutely like to. And
jumped at it.
And it was so well received. He called me and said, put together a pitch for an ongoing. I want to do an ongoing. IDW approved it. Nobody else at IDW thought it would run more than 4 issues. We got 10 years.
And it's a great book too. I'm trying not to, I'm a big fan. It's so right. It's so perfect. And I was going to ask you about that because with the Ghostbusters book in particular, they had made attempts to do a Ghostbusters comic a few times prior to your coming on, but they never quite got the voices right. But you really do. You really get the character voices right. And even people like Janosch, and even when they kind of wander in and think, was that just kind of a natural thing for you from exposure, or did you really have to work on it? Do you bounce it off people, or
the talent that I have is I have an ear and a memory for vocal tics in some cases, and cadence and so on. And part of it is that, and the rest of it is that I moved around a lot growing up, so I watched a lot of TV. New school, don't know anybody. Well, I'm just going to stay home and watch TV.
Yeah.
And I watched a ton of stuff and a lot of movies. Well, in the case of Ghostbusters, with the Saturday Night Live guys. So their voices, even when we're not talking about Peter Venkman. Well, I've seen, 24 Bill Murray movies and a bunch of interviews on late night shows and stuff like that. I got a pretty good idea how he talks and the word choices he uses, which makes the quote unquote ad-libbing easier, when I get a better idea in the middle of a story.
It's very cool. It's very impressive. And that's, and then when Dan Schoening came in on that book, it was just this marriage that was just like,
yeah.
I was going to say too, one thing that you seem to be a master of with all these different licensed properties is you were really great at coloring inside the lines. A lot of times people will take over a franchise and, they don't have the character voices down. You not only have the character voices down, but, with things like Ghostbusters, with things like that G.I. Joe Saturday Morning Adventures, boy, it just felt pitch perfect between the stories you're telling, the pacing that you're using. And so one of my questions before we dive into more in-depth stuff is like, how much time did you spend sitting around in Minnesota watching cartoons and movies and like...
A lot. I with something like G.I. Joe. My brother was the G.I. Joe fan, and he watched those things nonstop. So I would overhear. I would watch it too because that was, we had the one TV. A lot of those great voice actors popped up in so many shows that it was easy to get the vocal cadence that way. Like Chris Latta, G.I. Joe and Transformers. Yeah,
and Married with Children.
Oh yeah, there. But I just. I will refresh myself if it's not something I remember really well. I watched a couple episodes of G.I. Joe just to make sure I had, Bazooka's voice. I would not have remembered that as well as I remember, Duke or Cobra Commander or Destro. I go by memory on most of them. Mm-hmm. Not all of them, but
it's impressive. And even like you did the Marvel action Spider-Man stuff, and it felt like pitch perfect Spider-Man. Like,
oh boy, it was so much fun. I wish I could have written more.
Do you have any on your wish list if they decided to use?
I can't think of anything that is an active property that I haven't already gotten a chance to play with. I mean, not that I wouldn't play with it again,
right?
But Thundercats or Silverhawks or Centurions.
Oh my God!
There you go.
Power.
I was thinking things like Chuck Norris.
Oh man!
Those were cartoons.
Get you on a Thundar book. That's what I want.
Oh God, Thundar's rights are very difficult. I know that an editor who used to be over at IDW, Denton Tipton, he really wanted to get the rights of Thundar, and just they couldn't get it to happen for whatever reason. It's a complicated myriad of rights. So who do you go to?
Yeah. So that brings to mind a question of how much guidance, or I hazard to say interference or oversight by the license holders do you get? I understand Toho's notoriously particular, and you're working on the Godzilla book, or you did the Godzilla book. Are there some that are just kind of more easygoing and some that are more stricter?
It depends on how active the property is.
Okay.
I was doing some short stories for a UK magazine for the 2012 Ninja Turtles. The show was on the air, and I pitched an 8-page story, and there was a joke about Bigfoot in there. And they said, we don't know if we can do this because next year, as in the next calendar year, as in 11 months away, we're doing an episode with Bigfoot. So we don't know if we can let you do this joke.
Oh boy.
They don't want too many contradictions. Some are more than others. If it's a less active property, like with when we were doing Ghostbusters, years before they started doing the movies again, it was don't do this, this, or this. And we didn't do those things, and they let us do pretty much everything else.
I have a ton of questions about some of the stuff you're able to do in Ghostbusters, but my man Jay Scott has some process questions he's been holding on to.
So ahead of our interview, I went to your great website, burnhammania.com, and you have this great scripting method sample script page on your website that basically takes the reader through how you go about writing a script. And you mentioned right at the top that it is considered weird. A lot of people hear your method and they think it's weird. So my first question is, why do they think it's so weird? I thought it was nice. I thought it was a little in depth, though. It seemed like you were doing yeoman's work a lot of the time. I mean, there's, I think, 8 parts or 7 parts to it. You've got basically you plot, and then you break it down, and then you have a generation pass, and then you put in the sprockets where you start to script, and then you go back and you read again, and you start to put in like stage directions. So talk us through your script process for those who are listening to this on their walk or drive.
It's not quite as complicated as it seems. It's just more complicated to explain with images in detail. But I do plot out the story in general because I have to get it approved. I included that just because, most of the stuff I write has to go through approvals. And then, once I have the framework, I will write the story, and I will just write either the dialogue. Here's what so-and-so says, / that's the end of a panel. New comment, / or I'll write the action beats, Donatello punches Shredder, / ow. But it goes faster. Just, having that little bit. And once I have that down and get to the end of it, I'll make it formatted, So panel 1 is clearly labeled panel 1. I have all the instructions that the artist will need to draw the panel. I put that in there. I keep it in my head until this part of the thing. I'll change the dialogue as necessary. I'll move the panels around as necessary. This page has too many. This page doesn't have enough. This page doesn't need this many, so on. And then that's the end of the first draft. 90% of the time, the notes come back pretty light, some things that the editors suggest, that they would like different or consider different just for their own, sensibilities. Sometimes it's approved right away, which I regret if I spot something later that I wanted to change. Okay. I've sent stuff off before, like, I'll fix those when I get the notes back, and then no notes come back.
Well, one of the great things we do on this show is we talk to writers, we talk to artists. Oftentimes we're talking to them separately, and we talk to them about process, because simply put, there's a lot of different ways that you can do what you guys do. Like the writer does their part, the penciler does this part, even the inker, and then the colorist and all this other stuff. And so always the first question I have for artists is like, do you get full scripts? Like, do you like getting full scripts? Do you like getting partial scripts? Do you like doing Marvel method where you do all the work and then somebody comes in and fills in all the word bubbles? I guess from your perspective and the way that you script, based on what you just said, I guess you work a lot with Dan. So Dan's probably used to it, but like, how do they take your script? Are they like, wow, this is a lot, or is this not a lot? What's it?
Well, I mean, first off, if it's licensed, it has to be approved, so it has to be a full script.
Okay.
You can't do the Marvel method with licensed stuff, because they'll say, well, what are you going to do here? I can't approve it unless I know.
Okay.
So yeah, it has to be done like that. And sometimes the panels, especially with Dan, the panels will simply say something like, focus on Winston. And he holds the panel on Winston, and if there needs to be an emotion, I'll add that in there. I don't like to over art direct, because I started out having to draw stuff myself, and it drove me nuts if other people would do that. Right. So I try not to, but if it's something that I really need to be specific, then I'll go over more. But the thing that I find is easiest as far as everything is you keep one page of comic script to one page of comic. So if you have a lot of panel description, that eats up a lot of space, and you have less room for dialogue. So you're not going to have word balloons covering something that you just made somebody spend a day drawing. And if there's less panel description, there's less or no backgrounds, then, it's loaded up with words, because I try to keep it as easy as possible. And some artists will, Dan, again, I gave him one page, a splash page. All I asked for, this was Ghostbusters International, I think number 7. They went to Ireland. All I asked for was Walter Peck pointing. But nothing in the background, Dan. Just a color background. He's just pointing, and there's a lot. He drew an airport. He drew every single tile on the ceiling. He drew, he drew pedestrians, but passersby behind him. He drew all this stuff. And I'm like,
you do that on purpose?
He couldn't help himself.
I told you to do this.
He couldn't help himself.
I'm going to do all this detail. How about this?
He will draw. He will draw more. He will draw more.
You always had really good colorists on that book too. Like I know Andrew Harmon. Andrew Harmon did 1 or 2 issues of Ghostbusters somewhere along the line. But it was always so lush and so like it's just a beautiful book.
That's just a shout out to Luis Antonio Delgado. He started out with Ghostbusters, and he has only gotten bigger and better. He's working on 1 million Turtle books now. Last Ronin, he colored that. I don't think he realizes how good he is. I'm so lucky to continue working with both of those guys.
Yeah, it looks like animation cells. Like it doesn't even look like comic art.
Dan comes from animation, so he makes it. Yeah. Make sure that Luis colors it the right way.
You mentioned it very quickly in passing, but that was one thing that I pulled out from that page was the 1 page of script equals 1 page of the comic. That way you make sure that you haven't lost a page and, I forgot to send you the last bit of dialogue. And they're like, well, I have to redraw the entire page then because I'm missing a panel.
Yep,
so
exactly.
I thought, regardless of somebody getting into comics, that was something that I think you could pull out and almost apply to anybody's method, was sort of that 1 page of script equals 1 page of comic.
I mean, some folks really subscribe to the, I guess Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, that their 20-page comic script is 70 pages long, or what. I exaggerate, but probably not by much. Anyway, it is they include everything, and you can get a lot out of an artist that way. But also, it can be a slog to read if you need to get going.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, I want it to be, everything to be as fast as possible, so it doesn't eat up life.
As Chad said, there's a great pacing and a crispness to your pacing. I was just wondering whether or not that was that something that you kind of picked up yourself?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I was lucky to do early on was I got to ghostwrite some adaptations, some novels to comics. Mm-hmm. So you have this many issues of comics, you have this novel, make it fit. So I got to do a few of those. I also, the first project that I ever got paid for that would have had my name on it, the publisher just found out that the book that I had adapted was not public domain everywhere yet. It was a Princess of Mars. So the first John Carter book, and I had 64 pages to translate it over. And it's really good work for being able to cut things down, and anthology work as well. You have 8 pages to tell a story. Mm-hmm. Make it fit, make it make sense. Mm-hmm. Well, that means that it's just so much easier to cut and condense and make things fit well in a longer story. The little work that some folks don't want to do anymore. I recommend doing short stories, and I recommend for writers, if it's never seen by anybody, to draw a story themselves so that they can see. You cannot write panel 1, guy walks into a bar, looks around at everybody, passes them, goes to the back of the bar. Panel 2, it doesn't work that way. And so I've seen scripts like that. That was panel 1 of 7. These are things I recommend when people ask me for advice at comic conventions or whatever. Adapting something short into a comic strip, seeing if you can do it, make it make sense. That's good practice. Doing a short story, that's good practice. Makes it easier down the line.
Okay. Well, then we're going to be right back with more of this interview with Erik Burnham right after these commercial breaks. We're going to be talking about Ghostbusters in time for the Halloween season.
Oh, my.
So stay tuned for more of the last comic shop.
Hi, it's Carlo Calantuan, Last Comic Shop podcast listener and comic book tragic here in the Philippines. Mabuhay! When I'm in the US, I'm always on the lookout for a good deal on boards, bags, boxes, and all other manner of comic book related supplies. And that's why I love to go to bcwsupplies.com and use the promo code LCSPOD to get 10% off of all my orders. Not only do I get a discount on everything I buy at BCW, but I'm able to support the podcast when I use LCSPOD at checkout. So if you're in need of comic book supplies, head over to bcwsupplies.com and use the promo code LCSPOD. Oh, and guys, I'm still waiting for that Tressie review. Come on, when is it?
It was supposed to be a day at the beach. But for 4 friends, one wrong road will put them on a direct course to being the main course. Her name is Grandma Hazel, a chainsaw-wielding psychopathic cannibal, a beast of the backwoods with a body count higher than a bowl of blood-spattered Scotchmans. From the creators of Hocus Hocus, Grandma Chainsaw. Evil as a perm.
Back with more of Erik Burnham here on the Last Comic Shop, and he is going to talk about Ghostbusters.
Well, we're gonna force him to.
We're gonna force him to, because this is October. Right. I mean, he did a lot of other comic books, but you out there are probably going to watch Ghostbusters or the real Ghostbusters or something, maybe this Halloween season. And so we've got the guy that wrote tons and tons of issues of a comic series that you can go and pick up at your local comic book shop today.
I believe it's the longest solo run on that property since that property existed.
Yeah,
I know the Now comic was around for a chunk of time, but that was Real Ghostbusters and different writers, so that's pretty cool.
So we touched base a little bit in the previous segment about how you got kind of sort of involved with Ghostbusters, but I want to really touch base on how you got John Belushi's Blues Brother characters show up in that first issue. What was your thought process about that? How did you
Legally speaking, that is not John Belushi.
Just a ghost in a suit.
Just a ghost in a suit. No, I gave some strong hints to Dan about what I would like for the Spirit Guide to look like, and that seemed the obvious choice, and nobody said no.
Okay.
Which, very cool. They have said no because Dan also loves Easter eggs. So sometimes something would pop up and they would be like, Dan, no, you have to redraw this. You have to remove this. This can't be there. But for the most part, it's all been good. And yeah, we like references. We like, making things feel fun. And there was a subtle thread in the 80s of in jokes towards other movies.
Right.
I mean, you didn't see it all the time, but you would see it, Trading Places and Coming to America, something like that. Mm-hmm. And as far as pop culture goes, it's just it feels natural.
There you go. And I have to ask before we move away from this subject, the Chicago Ghostbusters. Mm-hmm. Chevy Chase is a Ghostbuster.
Right, yeah, that's
how did you guys get away with that?
That's Chevy Chase, right?
And it's like jerkwad Chevy Chase.
It's legally. Dan drew something that it's the hat and the Inspector Gadget hair, I think, that makes it resemble Chevy more than anything. But he drew it based on the voice that I had, and then when I saw the design, I leaned into it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Oh, and the shirt, you have him in the Chevy Chase T-shirt. Like, you guys were not hiding that.
That again, I don't want to blame Dan, but that was Dan. That was Dan with the Easter egg. He would sneak some of the, and if nobody said no, then it was fine. I hope as satire and parody. But Saturday Night Live, Second City ethos was mined pretty heavily. We tried to defer to that when we could.
Yeah, no, and it fits because when I was reading the story and I saw Ron show up and they're all keeping him at like arm's distance and they're like, yeah, we don't really like you too much. It was kind of like the way that, like, again, a lot of the members of the original Saturday Night cast like felt towards Chevy Chase because he was notorious for kind of sort of being a jerkwad. Yeah. So that.
Was there anything that you ever, because as you mentioned before, it goes through approvals. Was there anything that you wrote that you were like, they are never going to let this fly, and they did?
There was a lot of stuff that I thought they were going to tell me no. A lot of jokes that I didn't think would get passed that sailed through. There were a couple of things that they told me no for to start, but later on let me do. For example, at the beginning of the ongoing series, they said no Slimer. We got Slimer in the second issue because we didn't treat him like the real Ghostbusters.
Good.
No Dana and no Lewis. So we didn't get them for a while, but we did eventually get around to them when they said, okay, we're not going to do something that's awful. But
what was the reasoning?
They never told me their reasoning. They just told me no. I thought that maybe the original contract might have just included characters that appeared in the video game, which they didn't.
Okay.
That could have been what it was. And anytime we added another, if we add character from another Ghostbusters, there had to be new contracts, which I was not aware of.
Cool.
So new things had to be drawn up and done. And yeah.
Well, I wanted to start off because you mentioned the video game, and my connection to your Ghostbusters on actually happened when I was moonlighting at a video game store, and one of my buddies that worked there was not a comic book fan, but he was into Ghostbusters. And so he would have me pick up the Ghostbusters comics at my local comic shop and then bring them to the store and, and then pay me for them, and he would take them. So I got to read a ton of your books for free. It was awesome.
Well, good. That's,
but,
I mean, they were still paid for. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. No, he was a huge fan. And so when we found out we were going to interview you, I was like, hey, do you have any questions? And so one of his questions that he had was, when you were dealing with Ghostbusters, how hard was it to harmonize what was going on with the canon of the movies, with the video game? You guys brought in the rookie, all that stuff, and then sync that up with your stories. Like, what was that process like?
We were allowed a lot of leeway. We were told the things that we couldn't do, at least right away. Stay away from that stuff. Also, the things like don't give them any family members. So Peter's mother could not come in. That was an element. The first story that I pitched when I talked about earlier, when they were doing the one shots, and I pitched a Ghostbusters story just to have one ready. That was the story, the Ghost Smasher story. That was the thing that I pitched. And instead of Egon's lost friend, it was I think it was Peter's mother. Was a thing that we were going to do, and they said, okay, you can't do this, and when I went back to it a couple years later to do this story. That's a thing I did. So I took some things from the video game and I didn't take others. I know a lot of people think that they consider the video game Ghostbusters 3, which Ivan didn't. And that was his word. His word was like, this is not Ghostbusters 3. This was not a thing. So yeah, and he said that at a panel at Comic-Con. So so we took what we wanted to from that. We took what we wanted to from other Ghostbusters iterations. For example, Kylie showed up as Ray's employee. Right. It was just going to be a random character, and it was suggested by I believe Tristan Jones. He said it's got to be Kylie. It needs to be Kylie. This is who it should be. I'm like, all right, well, bring her in.
Yeah, so many different aspects between real Ghostbusters and extreme Ghostbusters, and every iteration eventually gets put into the pot that you're mixing together.
Exactly. So it was just a matter of what do you want to cherry pick, what do you want to use, and how can you make that work to the satisfaction of Ghost Corps. Don't do it this way. This is fine. And so that's what we did. And they were happy with it a lot. It just allowed us to get things to the eventual goal of getting somewhere near Aykroyd's original idea for the Ghostbusters, the telephone-sized script where Stay Puft shows up in the first 10 minutes. And it just, they go between, interdimensions, time and space and all this stuff. That's where we eventually got. I mean, it was a longer road. And the nice thing is, while this was a dormant property up until the most recent movie that Jason Reitman directed, we were the canon. This is what it was until a new movie came out and said it wasn't. And that's how it always is with licensed properties.
Right.
They will consider what a novel does or a comic does. They will consider that as what happened in the property until and unless a movie or TV show comes along and says, I don't want to deal with that. We're doing it.
And
this
even
way.
Incorporated the 2016 Ghostbusters movie, which everybody knows about the reaction to that. I thought it was a fine movie.
It was a fine movie.
Well, what it was with that was Paul Feig had a different concept for it, and he didn't view the Ghostbusters as the lore, which a lot of fans. He viewed it as, here are some very funny people, here are some ghosts, and the ghosts are the prop that the funny people use to make comedy. Looking at it under that lens, that's what it was. That's the movie he made, and it was a lot of fun under that lens. Looking at it under the lens of the lore, it didn't work because it didn't include everything else, and that's what some of the fans were irritated with, and then other ones just their fandom is Discord. So I mean,
well, I was going to ask too. Did you have like a little chip on your shoulder after you would work with those characters? Be like, no, this is how you do it, because you had managed to interweave everything so well. With the Lord, it felt like you were satisfying the Ghostbusters fan base and servicing those characters as well.
The problem with working on the characters for so long is, I'm going to go to see the movie and go, I wouldn't have done it that way. And I can't help that. That said, their way is not wrong. Jason's way was not wrong. Their approach was not wrong. I just wrote these characters for so long. They've been in my head so long that, I can't not have that. I would have done it differently moment. But, I'm certainly not going to go through and rant and rave about it being wrong. It's just different than I would have done. And I had that same feeling watching a show earlier this week, watch it and go, that's not how I would write it. And it just bugged me. And I said, I can never talk about this online because what it will be read as is, I hate the show. I hate everybody who made it. I hate everybody who watched it. I hate everybody who heard about it. So
you're describing Dan Slott's Spider-Man for me. A wonderful guy, I'm sure. But anyway.
But that's fair. It's completely fair. I mean, they were swimming around in your head. You had your own head canon. That's fine.
That sort of feeds into what I was going to ask you, because you through this book, you've done something miraculous. Okay. You managed to make Ghostbuster fans happy. Like, Ghostbuster fans, you're either kind of a ghost or you're all in, and they will argue about the placement of a ladder on the Ecto-1 and the sequence that the lights blink on the like they will get into minutia to the point where and fandom, as we know, because of the online thing, fandom has become very toxic with a lot of people because they're the ones with the bigger mouths, but how satisfying is it to get positive feedback from people that are deep into this? Like they love it.
There's nothing about somebody enjoying a story you wrote that isn't good. I mean, people who, just messages, letters, notes, emails. I was reading this while someone was in the hospital. It made me feel better. Thank you. Kids, I love this. This is great. I love these characters. Somebody else, I never read comics before. I got into it. All this stuff it makes me happy. And then I go to Reddit.
No, oh God.
No.
Well,
Go to Reddit.
Never go to Reddit.
Never go to Reddit. Reddit and Goodreads.
No.
You punish yourself by Reddit and Goodreads. But no,
You want to stare into the abyss? That's
even
fine.
on Reddit, I've had some compliments, so I can't even say that. But I mean, it's just I appreciate it, and I'm happy that I did something that affected them positively.
Now, to piggyback off the Reddit ideology here, I'm curious because your prep work, when you were writing your Ghostbusters stories, you managed that delicate balance of comedy and horror, and it did feel just like the movies. But I'm wondering, with your prep work, like, how much prep work did you have to do to achieve that balance? And in particular, did you ever meet a real life Ray Stantz? Like, I'm not talking Dan Aykroyd, but
Yes, yeah, no, there have been many. When I do a signing or a convention, some of those folks will come up with either things that I didn't get 100% exactly right, or things that I changed, or what have you, and they would talk very fast, and they would say their piece, and they would leave. I've only a couple of times met the type who come up just to complain, and then they won't leave once they're done complaining. I'm like, I'm sorry. I don't know what you want me to do. The book is out. Nothing is changing. And they would just say, well, and it just half an hour later, buddy, please.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go away.
He's waiting for his grilled cheese cut diagonally and put on in front of him.
It's the negativity has been very minor, and 99% of the time, or even the Ray Stantz behavior, 99% of the time has been online. So I would get a block of text.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine. It's passion more than antagonism.
I know you've talked about being in conventions and things with Ivan. Have you had any other interactions with the Ghostbusters cast or writers, or what was that like? What were their reactions to your comics?
Honestly, I've only met one other person. Technically two. Dan and I had a short conversation with Maurice LaMarche at the Ghostbusters Fan Fest in 2019. The only other person besides Ivan that I met was why can't I remember his actual name? Walter Peck.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
William Atherton.
Thank you, William Atherton.
Why?
Lovely man.
Good enough.
Yeah.
Chad.
All right. So one last thing, courtesy from my pal Jamie. So you've had not just the comic books, you have been involved in a ton of other media soirees with things like the Ghostbusters property, including things like cookbooks, including things like the Cryptozoic game. And Jamie, want to know, if you're ever in town, do you want to play a campaign of the Cryptozoic miniatures game with somebody who has all the Kickstarter sets and all the additional expansions and all the other versions?
That might be fun, because I've never actually played the game. I have it, but I don't have anybody to play games with. My friends and family do not play board games, so I have never actually sat down and learned how to play, because I have no one to play with.
Oh man!
So yeah, it looks fun.
Yeah, the miniatures are awesome. That's the part I saw.
It was very exciting to see characters that we created made into miniatures. It was also fun because for a while there was a match game, like that Marvel Quest and Puzzle Quest.
Right.
Had one of Ghostbusters, and they used several of our characters in that.
Oh wow!
Which it only lasted a little while, and then there was another fighting game, kind of like Pokemon Go, that didn't last as long because it was like a gig. So it was a huge game. I'm like, this game is fun. I need to get it off my phone. I don't want to delete pictures. But it was just neat in both of those situations to see stuff that Dan and Louise and I came up with, realized by somebody else. It was so much fun. So I mean, I was psyched to have that with the game. I'm psyched whenever somebody sends me a picture of a modified toy or cosplay. That always makes me happy, and just kind of, it's flattering that somebody cares enough about something that we made up that isn't connected to the main movie canon.
Is there? I presume it's part of the contract, but is there likeness rights and things like that? Like I know Janosch has a mustache. Was that because of likenesses, or was that just something you wanted to add for fun because it looked great on him? But
there are likeness rights. Yeah, that's why the characters look like Peter Venkman and not Bill Murray.
Right,
more or less.
They're just close enough. Right.
Yeah, Dan went a long way, and Dan's. What he leans toward is making it look, I mean, if you've ever seen him draw the Ghostbusters looking like the actors, they are dead on. And he would prefer to do it that way because he loves referencing. And drawing in that manner. But it's just easier if we don't have to get approvals, because they would have to approve every single panel, and every single one of them would have to approve every single panel.
But his style is so distinctive, and like, you know who those characters are. And I'll admit, it took me a minute or two to adapt to it, because I'm like, oh, this is really cartoony, and like, but no, like, once you get into it, boy, it hits on so many levels. And plus, with all the horror stuff going on and all the ghosts and everything, like, it's so multi-level. I love the art in that book. The last question, and this one's for me. One of the things we do on the podcast, we do recommendations. Is there a particular Ghostbusters story that you personally would recommend, that's your personal baby, that you're like, that was where we were firing on all cylinders?
Problem with that is some of them aren't necessarily as impactful without reading other stuff. I might say Crossing Over, because we got to play with all the toys, but that doesn't work as well without reading Mass Hysteria. It doesn't have the punch at the end. So I think probably what I would say is the second arc, the most magical place on earth, where they go to the amusement park. And Peter exercises himself. That gives a pretty good idea with what the Ghostbusters do and how they're about. So yeah, the first or second trade would probably be the best one to start with.
Well, we'll be right back with wrapping up the last comic shop for today and our talk with Erik Burnham. So we will be right back with stuff he's working on now. So stay tuned.
Madison is on the air.
What happens when 20-something Madison is zapped into old-time radio shows? No technology.
I want to go to voicemail.
No Starbucks.
Don't call yourself a coffee shop if you only sell drip coffee.
And no one is PC.
I don't need no lift from...
Were you about to say woman? Because I'm wearing a gun and I have no idea how to use it.
Madison on the Air serves to highlight the way we were and the way we are today, with original radio drama scripts adapted to include the modern-day Madison as she joins famous characters from radio's past, including Sergeant Joe Friday.
Just the facts, ma'am. I've never actually said that.
Marshal Matt Dillon.
We're not having a shootout with a 10-year-old kid.
I'm too woke to be a part of this.
Superman.
I didn't realize how cold it would be flying like this.
I have to get into the higher atmosphere.
And many more. Visit us on the web at madisonontheair.com or find us pretty much any place podcasts can be found.
You talk so old-timey. I have no idea what you said, but it's adorbs.
You know what I think? This world we're in right now is the fairy tale. And what's really real is on the other side.
Ramsey, mechanic by day, aspiring comic book creator by night, went into the woods and tripped. He was bombarded by bizarre and mysterious glyphs that he drew into his sketch pad and onto the body of his muse, Regina.
Oh, groovy! Your art is crawling all over me.
Shit. What is going on with you?
What's going on with you? All of a sudden, you're a complete drip, baby. Maybe you need another limb to the head! Ah!
Bloom, written and created by Ted Sikora, with art by Butch Mappa.
How are you feeling, Ram Man?
You've never experienced a story so astonishing, so far out and away from the beaten path.
Where in the am I?
Blast off with Bloom, the origin of a prophet. Order yours at herotomorrow.com.
Coming back, my question, I guess, is what do you have upcoming? What can people look forward to? What can you talk about? I'm sure there's some stuff that you've got on the down low until it drops, but what can we expect from you in the next 6 weeks, 2 years?
Yeah. Mostly the stuff that I am 100% sure is on my plate and coming out is Ninja Turtle related. There is the Saturday Morning Adventures. I'm just now writing issue 10. And I've gotten to do a lot of weird stuff with that. I want to talk about issue 8 just because I'm so proud of this ridiculous. There was the character from the cartoon series that was called Mr. Og. Okay. Mr. Og was basically Mr. Mxyzptlk, filtered through Pee Wee Herman. That's what he was. And he was in the show and he did all the stuff that you would expect from that character. And I said, he would be fun to use. They said, well, you can't have him come off like Pee Wee Herman and you can't have him come off too much like Mxyzptlk. How would you approach that? I said, can I have him come off like Q? So I had him come off like Q and I brought him in and he brings the turtles into a trial and he's putting them on trial for breaking the fourth wall. only a certain few can do it. Then he names some characters behind Censored signs. Was the idea I had that I don't know if we're going to do, but I mean, it's just the obvious characters. He goes, you can't do it, so he puts them on trial. And it's just a bunch of breaking the fourth wall that I had a ridiculous amount of fun with. So I like the ability to do that. Thanks to that cartoon got so wacky. I was watching one episode and Raphael literally said, "What, are you leaving the show?" So I mean, that's that stuff is in there, and I said, okay, look, I got carte blanche. It had happened over 10 years. I can do it, and it's been a blast. But this we've been bouncing back and forth between very, very silly, very goofy stuff and stuff that's a little bit more action adventure, but still has a sense of humor. So that's what we're doing on that. Dan Schoening is drawing the arc that I'm currently writing, so that'll be fun. It's been him, and then him and Luis on one, and then Sarah Meyer, who did colors on the miniseries and has just had a graphic memoir released through a traditional publisher, Monstrous. I'm sorry, good stuff. So Sarah is working apart from Dan, so they're bouncing back and forth between arcs, and I'm trying to keep up with two artists. But we've got that, and then the other thing that I'm working on is it's a sort of sequel to a book I did with Matthias Santaluco called Secret History of the Foot Clan. Okay. This is the untold destiny of the Foot Clan. I had pitched just a simple idea of, okay, Karai, Shredder's descendant, is now fully in charge of the Foot Clan. He's gone. She's got the reins. What is she going to do? Can I just do their first mission? And then they just kept coming up with ideas. Well, it should be this, and it should be this, and it should be this. And Matthias should draw it. It just started getting bigger and bigger. Now it's a whole event thing. And it's going to be I don't know when it's coming out first. I just found out the other day it's a bi-monthly book. So I don't have to rush the scripting as I thought I was going to.
Nice.
But I mean, it's going to be, monsters and ghosts and all kinds of fun fantasy ninja angle of the universe, as opposed to the more sci-fi. That's the fun. That's the fun one that I have. And then a comic strip I do on Patreon. That's for my my own amusement. That's all I've been. That's it for the moment. Until things can turn on a dime. You can have absolutely nothing going on for a while, and all of a sudden you're working on 5 books.
Wow.
And I mean, last year, this is how fast something could come along. This was 2 days after Christmas. I got an email saying, "Would you like to write a Army of Darkness versus Reanimator miniseries?"
Okay.
So that sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah. When do you need something by? So cool. Can you have us a pitch by Friday? We're going to get the pitch by Friday. This is great. Can we get the first issue in 3 weeks?
Yeah.
So I mean, it turned around that they decided they wanted to do the book and me to write it, and it just went that quick. And I'm always grateful. I always appreciate it. The only other thing that's on the stands that's new is the finale of our Godzilla series that we did, me, Dan, and Luis.
And that was super well received.
Well, it wasn't, but kids loved it, which was the audience they were going for. And there was a few folks who were like, "I'm 45 years old. Why isn't this like what I expected?"
Yeah, that seems to be a thing. That seems to be a thing. They can't seem to separate, this isn't for you. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, people have selective memory, and when you think of a Godzilla movie, one of the old 60s, 70s Godzilla movies, you will remember Godzilla in the big wide open field attacking the other monster, 2 guys in suits and going at it. You might remember stepping on a building. You probably don't remember something like, okay, well, we're going to have a live broadcast, full audience, full of families, and we're going to have the Shobijin, 6-inch high women, just sing to broadcast it to the country, and nobody's going to find that weird.
Yeah, like my favorite from growing up is Godzilla vs. Megalon, and there's about 5 minutes of a kid riding this little dolphin machine in the beginning. I love Godzilla vs. Megalon. It's one of the worst reviewed ones, but that's my favorite out of all.
It's on Mystery Science Theater 3000. Yeah. That's one of the best ones.
Oh my goodness! So I mean, we had a lot of fun, and I got to do G-Fest in Chicago. It was packed. It was simulcast at Tokyo, and it was just nuts how happy the folks were at that place. About the book, and I guess that would be the place to find the fans.
That's it. Yeah.
But yeah, no. For the most part, it really was well received by the folks we were after. And we got a lot of kids send pictures and appreciate it. Anyway,
very cool.
That's great.
I had one final question for you.
Yep.
based on everything you've done, is there a licensed property or Marvel DC character that you haven't written for yet that you want to? Do you have somebody that, oh man, I really wish I could write that. I've got great ideas, or
I've got a list. I mean, we've talked about Spider-Man. I'd love to write Spider-Man again. It is just a character that's near and dear and affected not only my sense of humor, but the fact that I know the word neurotic from 6 years old. I would love to write Moon Knight. He would be a lot of fun. He's been a lot. It's been funny. Marvel has brought in a lot of my favorite characters the last couple of years from growing up. They brought in Moon Knight. They brought in Namor. They brought in Monica Rambeau, She-Hulk. I mean, this is great. I love all these characters. Plastic Man would be a fun one. The JLI from the 80s, the Giffen League.
Oh, the best.
Go back to Kui Island.
Yes, I would love to write them, and Indiana Jones, which is probably never going to happen, but I would love to write Indiana Jones.
Yeah, Indy for some reason never seems to click in comics. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because the movies are so kinetic and comics aren't. I don't know.
It's weird. They never had the same. Well, I guess the reason they didn't have the same run as Star Wars is you can have any of hundreds of characters star in a Star Wars book, but you need Indiana Jones for an indie story. So
that's the same thing as why did Indiana Jones ever take off as like a video game, like I don't know, like Tomb Raider or anything like that? They tried to make them but then they would make like Uncharted and stuff, and you're just like, no, this is pretty much an Indiana Jones game. Why can't we put Indiana Jones in that role and actually make it work? No, like people don't seem
that suspect that's partly licensing stuff. We want to do this. No, it's easier to do our own stuff.
Yeah. My dream, if I ever got into comics, my dream license would be all of the John Hughes Shermer, Illinois characters. I actually have
that would be fun. The other thing that I didn't even think of was, do you guys remember a few years ago when Darwin Cook was adapting the Parker stuff?
We did that on our show.
I would have loved to have done the same with Elmore Leonard.
Oh yeah! Oh my God, Freaky Deaky would be great.
Yeah, just a bunch of them would be fantastic. I mean,
that's awesome.
It would be good. I would enjoy that. Or Discworld. There's so many franchises that would be a lot of fun to adapt. And even if I'm not the right person, I would still have fun doing it.
I want to be Eric's best friend. Yeah, this is cool.
I almost got Mystery Science Theater. I wrote a pitch.
Oh, did you?
I wrote a pitch, and they wanted too much for the license.
Oh.
And so I who wrote the comic eventually was Joel.
Yeah.
We did that.
I can't feel bad about you can't feel bad
about
losing out to Joel. Not at all.
All right. Well, thank you so much for stopping by the Last Comic Shop. Eric, where can they find you daily? Like in social media and all the interwebs? Give us the 411 there, sir.
My website, burnhamania.com. The
sounds awesome.
Doesn't sound awesome. It doesn't sound obvious. But that's got links to everywhere I can be found.
Okay.
That's the easiest way.
That's the easiest way. And we hope that you stop by the Last Comic Shop again, sir. Thank you so much for your time today. And again, you've always got fans here at the shop, so we hope that you come back.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, well, that was great talking with Erik Burnham, and we hope that you stick around for more of the Last Comic Shop all of this Halloween season, because we've got wonderful Halloween and spooky-related books for your listening entertainment. Any case, you can do that by reviewing and subscribing over at www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com. Terrific place where you can not only get all these episodes upcoming with books like Marvel Zombies 3 and Deceased and Through the Woods, I think that's Jay's pick this year, as well as you can download some of the episodes from last year featuring some awesome Halloween spooktacular stories such as
Franken Castle? Did we do Franken Castle?
Yeah, we
did Franken Castle.
And Somebody's Killing the Children. That still is very popular.
And we're killing it on social media at Last Comic Shop on whatever your social media platforms may be. And we don't have recommendations this week, but we always have merch. J.A., what's our merch of choice?
So we've got licensed properties this week. They're all licensed by us, though. So, it's a lot of Last Comic Shop related.
They're licensed plates properties.
Yes. That's right.
But you can get the Halloween logo, right?
You can get the new improved Halloween logo. We added podcast to the bottom of it so that we are distinguished from the last comic shop in Malaysia. We occasionally have people asking us what time we're going to be open on Saturdays.
Maybe we will have like people that will fight. They'll put on their last comic shop shirts and their last comic shop podcast shirts, and they'll wonder who's canon.
No, what we need to do is have a collab with this Malaysian comic book shop and have some people in Malaysia buy some T-shirts and stand in front of the last comic shop Malaysian comic book store with their last comic shop podcast T-shirts.
Oh, I wonder if they've adopted the logo yet.
Oh,
we'll have to send legal out.
Yes.
Right. One thing we don't want to send out is a cancellation notice, so make sure that you are rate, reviewing, and subscribing again to The Last Comic Shop. And until next week, I was the host with most, Andy Larson. I was joined by Chad Smith, J.A. Scott, and the wonderful Mikey Wood. And thank you so much to Erik Burnham for joining us on The Last Comic Shop today. Until next week, stay safe, stay spooky, and remember that if you're going to take a bath, it's probably not a good idea. Just leave it where it is, and you can get clean that way.
Are we ever going to get rid of these dad jokes?
I mean, okay, it's good advice. Don't steal somebody's bathtub. I understand.
Was a 2023 Black Angus production.